It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Of course, always a big shout out as well to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. It is great to have you all here today. And we got a RealAg Issues panel today. Yes, it's going to be fantastic. We got Tyler McCann, Managing Director at CAPI, Kelvin Heppner from RealAgriculture, Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture, and of course, myself, the host, Shaun Haney. We got to talk about a number of different issues. Canada-U.S. trade talks. We've got where the heck is Canada going to get all this money for its increasing defense budget? Could the Agriculture Department be one of the areas that faces some pretty significant cost cutting? We'll talk about that. Plus, my trip to Montana earlier this week. And what are some of the ways that Canada can really maintain the momentum as it applies to increasing competitiveness and, just overall economic activity going forward? Now, if you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Keep the feedback coming. shaney@realagriculture.com. Or, of course, you can always call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. And, make sure that you check over the weekend here, you check out RealAgriculture.com for all of the insight on things that are happening in the world of agriculture. We had a Stats Can report today, as well on Monday, big report from USDA on that corn acre. Lots to chat about in the markets and more. So make sure you keep tuned with RealAgriculture.com. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to get to that RealAg Issues panel right after this.
At Alliance Seed, our premium varieties of wheat, durum, barley, and oats are crafted to fit the unique needs of your farm. By choosing Alliance Seed, you're selecting reliable seed that enhances your production potential and boosts your bottom line. Discover how our top-performing seed products can elevate your fields at allianceseed.com or call us at 1-877-270-2890.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify.
If you only listen to RealAg Radio, you only get half the picture. For greater insight into the issues that affect farming, tune in to RealAgriculture.com. Crops, livestock, machinery, farm management, and the markets, even food and travel. Real Agriculture Online digs deeper into the topics that affect the way you work and live. So get connected today. Read, watch, and listen to the people who know at RealAgriculture.com.
Let's get to the RealAg Issues panel. Up first, bringing in the team here on a week where there's a lot of issues to chat about. We've got Lyndsey Smith coming out of Ottawa, Ontario. Hey, how are we doing, Lyndsey?
You know what? See this smile on my face, everyone watching us on YouTube? It's because I'm not melting anymore. It's beautiful.
Always
it's like
whining about
maybe 20 degrees. You know what? Have you seen me? I am built for cold weather.
You're very Nordic.
Light. Yeah, I am very Nordic. I am built for snowstorms and dark days and moderate temperatures. And so and I know it's stupid to be like, it's not the heat, it's the humidity, but I grew up near Winnipeg. It's beautifully hot in the summer because it is a dry heat. It actually does make a difference. The humidity is stifling. Monday, I went outside and the air was wet.
Yeah.
It was gross. And I was very crabby. So thank you, my whole family, for putting up with me.
I don't know why you're in Kinburn. I think you should be in Aberdeen, Scotland.
Yes, actually. And Chris is a Moore, and they actually they came from Scotland via Ireland. I'm pretty sure there's like some story there as to why they left. Not a good one. But yes.
Knowing Chris, there probably is a pretty good story to that one.
There is a very,
yeah.
Yes. And, and that is where I should be, somewhere in the UK. Anyway.
Good stuff. Well, speaking of Winnipeg in Manitoba, also joining us is Kelvin Heppner, coming out of just south of there in Altona, Manitoba. Kelvin, how are we doing?
Doing well here, Shaun. The canola is blooming. The spring wheat is heading here. It feels like it's early, like summer's flying by here, partly because it's been dry. We could use some rain, but things are doing well here. We're good.
Story of the prairies. We could use some rain. Also joining us is Tyler McCann. He's managing director at Cappy, based out of somewhere in Quebec. How are we doing, Tyler?
I'm doing really well, Shaun. It's great to be with you this week. I know RealAg, you guys always do good stuff, but I tell you, there was a lot of really good content you guys put out this week, and I think it's going to set up a pretty good show, pretty good discussion for us today.
Interesting. I'm curious what your favorite piece was. I've got questions for Kelvin on the economy here, but what was your favorite piece?
My favorite. So I'm a big Michael Grunwald fan, and I have been for a while, but I guess I'm a bit of a sucker for your interview with Anthony Parker, in part because I came up and in a good way. So I thought that was pretty good too. But some really interesting stuff going on in Canadian agriculture, and hopefully some good food for thought for your listeners to think through. So if people that are listening today haven't heard this week's shows, go back, find some time over the weekend, and take them all in.
I appreciate that, man. Appreciate that. Okay, Kelvin. Canada's GDP shrunk in April. Why?
Well, manufacturing sector alone down 1.9%, the steepest drop that we've seen since kind of the COVID timeframe, I guess, back in 2021. StatsCan today showing overall GDP in April on a monthly basis down 0.1%. And their advanced estimates numbers for May showing a similar decline in activity. And so transportation equipment manufacturing was hit hard. So that means the auto sector and others, including potentially the agriculture sector, is adjacent to that in our our machinery manufacturing side of things. Wholesale trade also fell. And then there was, I guess, the election, hockey playoffs. They referenced hockey playoffs as driving, supporting GDP in the entertainment, recreation sector. But overall, not a positive sign is the impact of U.S. tariffs on Canada's auto sector and manufacturing sectors showing up here in the GDP numbers.
Lyndsey, does that put more pressure on Prime Minister Carney to close somewhat of whatever this agreement is that him and President Trump are working on to get that behind us?
Absolutely. And, I think what is interesting, and as we watch the news this week, one thing I think that I appreciate, but we'll keep tabs on over the next little while, is that, let's face it, summer tends to be, from a Ottawa perspective, a ghost town, right? I mean, Parliament is not sitting, and everybody goes home to their own ridings and all that sort of stuff. Carney absolutely has to keep the pedal to the metal here and continue working on all of these aspects and this deal with the U.S. Whether or not what comes out of all this happens quickly is one question, and what it actually looks like is the other big one. But I think, I want to see that there is no lull in the summer here, because it is far too important. And we are starting to see these numbers roll in, because we know there is that delay in the impact of some of these things, and also, of course, the reporting of it. So really important, I think, that Carney keeps working on this file, keeps, Canada's best interest front and center, and doesn't take the time off in the summer. Yeah.
Tyler, what's your take on Kirsten Hillman being named? Not only, she is already the ambassador to the U.S. For Canada, but she's now the chief negotiator as well. What's your take on that?
Not a huge surprise. Again, she has a track record as a negotiator. Part of the reason she got the nod originally to go to Washington as ambassador was because of her success and track record negotiating Canada's participation in the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal. So she knows her way around a trade negotiation. She, by all accounts, knows her way around Washington very well. I think that's a really good sign. And just building on what Lyndsey said, I think that there's this big question in the air around at what point in time does the momentum around doing things differently start to run out? And hopefully what the numbers on the economy show and this decline in manufacturing, that momentum can't come off, that momentum needs to keep coming forward. And this isn't something that we're just a mad sprint and everything's going to be fixed by the fall. There are really serious implications for the Canadian economy, for Canadian workers, for Canadian jobs, for farmers, for all of us. And we need to keep pushing forward on this so that we can try and change the direction that we're heading, because the direction right now is not a good one.
Yeah, Tyler, honestly, a lot of conversations I had this week from people just in catching up on the phone, a lot of concern about Canada sort of falling back into its normality of attitude around this stuff.
And I think we've certainly seen this in the agriculture context, right? I think we can all probably attest to the fact that the way people were talking in January and February when we thought tariffs were a real big thing is wildly different than how they're talking about today. You know, this, we see it on interprovincial barriers. Nova Scotia was a real leader, a champion on this. They've already started to kind of, but all of a sudden there's some exceptions and we fall back into our old ways of doing things. But the underlying causes, the challenges that we face are not going away, and we need to push forward and we need to see some changes happen.
The one thing that is a little bit is still different than the prior government is the Globe and Mail has article, Kelvin, talking about how Carney is already starting to temper his expectations, or Canada is starting to temper their expectations in terms of how this negotiation is going with the U.S. Now, some of that has to do with potentially a blanket tariff, like around a 10% that the U.K. now faces with the United States, which would be definitely a different world for a lot of Canadian exporters, but not 25%, I guess. One of the differences is in terms of how Carney's going about this. Highly secretive. Very few people understanding what's being negotiated, almost looking at it like a corporation would on an M&A, merger and acquisition team. He's playing his cards very close to his vest.
I think I'm going to take a contrarian view on this, Shaun, and say that people are putting that lens on this because of Carney's persona and his brand. He's coming from the business community. He's coming from the economic side of things. Of course, they're going to put it through that lens. And the other thing is, that's the only way that Trump knows how to do any negotiations, is at the highest level in secret, where only Trump's brain knows what's happening. So it makes sense that on the other side, Carney can't be talking to all stakeholders and including them. So I think this is how it's always going to go when negotiating with Donald Trump. It's going to be at the highest level and just a few people in the loop.
That story in the Globe did say, Lyndsey, that Canada is really scraping for leverage, which was concerning.
Well, but also not a surprise, right? I mean, from the outset of this entire created disaster, this has been the conversation: how does Canada approach this? And I think Carney has been getting some pats on the back on the way he's been handling Trump, whether it was the G7 meeting or coming out of that and now into these negotiations, that, Carney seems to be at least understanding how to communicate with Trump. At the same time, when it all comes down to it, we are not negotiating from a position of strength on so many aspects, right? So I think that, to Tyler's point about, keeping the pressure on and keeping the momentum rolling, yes, these conversations in trying to work a deal with the U.S. is important. At the same time, we saw the swift passage of Bill C-5. We have to keep things moving for the betterment of Canada as a whole. Independent of the U.S., these things have to be happening in tandem, and we just can't let off. We have to keep pushing forward.
Tyler, what were you going to say?
I wanted to go back just to what Kelvin said about the way negotiations happen. I mean, I think that there's this idea that negotiations should happen out in the public is like mind-boggling to me, right? Like, if you're a farmer trying to work a deal with your grain dealer, you don't go to the coffee shop and sit down in front of everybody and have your discussion so everybody can hear how your negotiations go. Like, that's not how business is done at that level. That's not how business is done when you're trying to land a trade deal between two sides. Quite reasonable. I think it's a bit more focused this time because it does seem like it's the president and the prime minister more directly engaged rather than negotiators, the way it was when Steve Verhoeven was doing the NAFTA renegotiations. But these things do need to happen behind closed doors, and you do need the space to be able to put ideas forward, and you do need to be able to have that freedom and flexibility to figure out, again, to Lyndsey's point, given the little bit of leverage that we have, how do you get the best deal possible? I do think that there's this, it seems like everybody accepts but doesn't really say out loud that a new permanent tariff is coming, and that is going to be part of the deal. And I think that should be one of the things that we need to start to recognize, that if a 10% tariff is going to be baked into the future of the Canada-US trading relationship, what does that mean? What does that look like? And if you're a food manufacturer or an equipment manufacturer in Canada doing business in the United States, does that 10% tariff that could get baked in for good going forward put your business at risk? And if that's true, then what does that mean going forward? One of the things I think it's been surprised, I don't know, Kelvin, what you think about this, but I keep waiting for the Canadian dollar to start falling again, and kind of in light of all of these things. But it seems to have been a bit more resilient than I guess I thought it was going to be at the beginning of the year.
Mm-hmm. To me, and tariffs are potentially part of that too. The U.S. dollar will depreciate the higher, more tariffs they put on their imports. But I'm curious how Carney sells a 10% permanent tariff politically to Canadians. He's kind of set himself as this expert who knows how to navigate around the Trump president himself and navigate these situations. And are Canadians going to just accept, and our businesses, our exporting sectors going to just accept a 10% tariff, even if we think that that is the inevitable result here? Especially when what is this deal actually going to be worth? What's the point of the CUSMA USMCA renegotiation next year if we're signing this back in the napkin deal that is very short-term, reactionary? Like, and how do you make long-term investments around all of that? To me, it's such a difficult situation that Carney is backed himself into this corner here in terms of potentially having to say, "Hey, Canadians, we've signed this agreement where we have a 10% tariff on everything going to the U.S." kind of thing.
Well, and I think also the details of everything might not be everything. Where are there exemptions, and is that on something like cattle, for example, or something like that, right? That's a detail that obviously we won't know at this point.
This deal isn't going to have a lot of detail in it, though. It's going to be high level with a couple headline items in it. Yeah,
but if you 100%. So if you look at the pattern of some of the other arrangements that are being worked on from the U.S. side, the UK is an example of that, where there are 2 to 3 items that are incredibly important to the Oval Office. That gets all the focus, and not a lot of other stuff is dealt with. So in Canada's case, steel and aluminum, and the auto sector, and national defense spending in this golden dome. That might
digital sales tax.
And digital sales tax
is coming in
so
here in a couple of days.
Those are kind of the 4 things I think that probably get most of the headline, and agriculture, we will have to see. Hey, we got to take a break. We've got more coming up here on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, here for the RealAg Issues panel. We'll be back right after this.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Mazik Seeds and Lalamon Plant Care.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is a video series that showcases the latest in canola research and production agronomy. Learn from some of the best at your own pace through quick and timely producer-focused videos available on our YouTube channel. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is the quickest way to keep up to date on all the latest in canola production. Boost your canola IQ with the Canola School, brought to you by BASF, and visit canolaschool.com.
And we're back here on RealAg Radio for the RealAg Issues panel. Hey, with volatile markets and rising costs, now is your chance to be a part of the solution. It's time to secure your future with Genesis Fertilizers. Gain control and ensure access to locally produced nitrogen. Act now to protect your farm's future for generations. Visit genesisfertilizers.com. RealAgriculture.com to learn more. We got Tyler McCann, Managing Director at Cappy, Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith, Shaun Haney of Real Agriculture. And we were just talking about some of that trade negotiation between Canada and the U.S. One of the things that's going to be discussed is Carney's making some pretty big promises when it comes to Canada's defense spending going forward. Now we're talking about 5%, which we're putting a big number on the board. Prime Minister Trudeau was talking about how we couldn't get to 2% till like 2035 or 2040, and now we're getting to 5% in a very quick hurry. Tyler, where's the money going to come from?
So first, Shaun, let's acknowledge that the 5% number is different than the 2% number. So the 2% number is defense spending. 5% can include things like infrastructure, processing, targeted support investments that enable your defense sector. So that in the Canadian context, that could include spending that we're making to harvest, process critical minerals, for example. So the way that you get to the 5% is a little bit different. But I really
think 3.5. 3.5 has
3.5. Yeah, that's right.
1.5 can be the other
pieces. But it is. I think that we need to understand that defense commitment has huge consequences for Canadian agriculture and the spending that the federal government does. They are going to have to make choices, and we have to keep in mind, right, that this is a world where not only are we spending more, the Prime Minister Carney, as well as effectively every other leader, is committed to maintaining the new social programs that the Trudeau government launched, like pharmacare and dental care. All of those things have added costs, and so money is going to get squeezed, and it's going to get squeezed in a big way. Carney likes to talk about his desire to spend less and invest more. We still don't really know what that means and what that means in the agriculture context. And if I was a farm group meeting with the agriculture minister, that would absolutely be on the list of things that I would be asking him is, what does this mean, and what's it going to do to your budget? Keeping in mind that he also, Minister MacDonald, sits on the government committee or the cabinet committee looking at government spending. And so I think this is going to have huge consequences, and we need to understand that it could radically reshape how the federal government doles out its money.
Well, the other complicating factor here, from a timing perspective, is we're talking about trying to make Canada more competitive and trying to recruit that corporate investment. You know, that you talk about the investment side of the equation, raising taxes to backfill this dollar, that does not make us more competitive. And so that just can't be the go-to answer. Hey, we're just going to raise taxes.
The good news is that a lot of the things that we need to do to make Canada more competitive don't cost any money. Now, I worry sometimes that we're getting too caught up in the potential of regulatory reform. And I worry a little bit that we're going to have reformed all of our regulations, and we still are going to have a lot of issues that we need to deal with as a country. But the government can do a lot by improving the regulatory framework, making it easier to do business, and spending the money it does spend a lot more wisely in this country, because the issue in Canadian agriculture is often not that governments aren't spending enough. It is just that governments are spending it poorly and in ways that do not deliver impact and results.
Lyndsey, I can see Kelvin. He is squirming here. He has a hot take. Lyndsey, get ready for it. Here it comes.
Get ready. I'm ready. I'm taking notes.
I was just gonna highlight and bring attention to the fact that Tyler is being quite critical of the Carney government here for not moving fast enough and not explaining their talking points.
Whoa. I don't think that I was critical at all. I don't think that's critical at all, Kelvin. I'm saying that the Prime Minister is a difficult challenge, and I'm a little bit maybe critical that the Agriculture Minister hasn't come out and explained his piece in this. I think the Prime Minister's done a pretty good job being clear where he's going.
Trevor Toome at the University of Calgary has estimated that this is going to take about 19% of Canada's GDP to cover this cost without, unless we want to dip into debt. So 150 to 160 billion dollars on an annual basis is what 5% will cost by 2035, is what government estimates say. And so Trevor's saying 19% of GDP, and so the options there are either raising that revenue through taxation or achieving it through debt. And of course, Canada's deficit situation isn't at a place where we really want to play with that either. So then you got to grow the economy and collect more tax revenue through increasing that GDP. But then your dollar amount increases too, because this is a formula based off of GDP.
Right.
But again, I think what the government is relatively clear on is that they're going to spend money differently, right? We have a tremendous wealth of programs out there that will not exist anymore. And so, I don't know, maybe this is the fiscal conservative in me coming out, and maybe this is kind of my naive hope, but I expect that we're going to have programs cut.
Ooh, Doge Canada, Lyndsey. Doge Canada.
Here it comes.
Except done smarter and better, and not
called Doge.
There is also potential to benefit agriculture in this in terms of dual purpose results. Look at all the innovation, a lot of the innovation that's come out of the U.S. in terms of agriculture technology over the last 30, 40 years. A lot of that, even longer, is originally been military research. When you look at GPS, when you look at a lot of the tech stuff, look at drones, artificial intelligence, potentially ports. Investment in ports could be done as part of this 5% target as well. So to me, there are some things where agriculture could benefit, but not directly, not in terms of budget for agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. That could potentially be cut, as Tyler
Lyndsey, that's a good point, Kelvin. Lyndsey, you and I need a side hustle. I think we're going to start realmilitary.com here during the commercial.
Okay, so
I think that's where the future is.
I think it is. And in fact, when news broke of not just the initial sped up timeline to meet the 2%, but now we're going 5%, I have been Googling madly of like how to make sheep farming part of national defense. Have yet to figure it out, except for that I think uniforms might use some wool. Other than that, though, I gotta figure that one out. Great point, though, Kelvin, and I do think that, you know, Tyler's being all doom and gloom here about what we're all going to lose in agriculture. I do think there are benefits here, and I think that, you know, how we pay for this is going to be probably some combination of, you know, more productivity, increased debt, decreased spending, et cetera. Like it's probably not going to be any one thing. It's probably going to be a whole bunch. And I'm not naive to think that we're going to keep everything as is, but maybe as is isn't working that great anyway. But I think there could be, for the sector as a whole, there could be some benefits and some increases in productivity, efficiency, et cetera, as a result of some of this spending, for sure. So, it is, I have to say, though, it is looking at how we get there in the next little while, how we pay for it, how all of those things is just, it's a logistical nightmare.
And will Canadians accept it? Do Canadians want to have a country that spends $150 billion a year on military?
Well, oh boy. I feel like you're trying to trigger me. Are you saying that on purpose? Are you trying to get me going on this? Is that what you're doing?
Trying to ruin Shaun's day. That's what you're doing.
Go ahead. Try to have good radio here. Good discussion.
Yeah. Well, and so I'm going to push back. So Lyndsey called me doom and gloom. I'm not doom and gloom about spending less, because I think that there's huge potential for us to spend a lot better than we are. I'm doom and gloom about our ability to spend better. And I'm doom and gloom about our ability to show leadership in the sector to say, this is what we need to get results. And so if there's something that I'm negative about, it's not the fact that the Ag Department's budget's going to change. I'm negative in that I don't think we're going to be able to get the best bang for our buck out of that dollar, because we trip over ourselves. We can't set clear priorities. We don't actually know what we want to do and what we want to achieve. And so I'm far more doom and gloom about that than I am about the fact that our government's going to be a little bit more responsible with its budgets and focus it on the things that we need to spend, like defense of the country.
I think the rest of the world is, and you can focus on the U.S. having this attitude in terms of Canada freeloading, in terms of outsourcing its military, but Europe feels that way too. We have for 10 plus years longer. We're really good at talking and referencing, you know, Canadian peacemaking in World War II, but our brand is bad in this area.
Well, Canada made this commitment in 2014, this 2% commitment that we
embarrassing.
Potentially
you
going to hit
can't
this
rush
year.
These things,
but,
Kelvin.
But if government is reprioritizing funds into this, that means cuts to other things that people expect from the government in Canada.
Well, Tyler is not. Tyler is. How did you put it, Tyler? You are not optimistic about our ability to spend the money. How did you put that?
No, so I'm not pessimistic about spending less. I'm pessimistic about our ability to spend less better.
Okay, and I'm pessimistic while we're in this, you know, this group of, you know, trying to confide our feelings and worries. I'm pessimistic about our ability to want to be competitive. That's really that's what concerns me, is the attitude around this, that we're more thinking about, well, we want to be competitive, but we're focused on the outcome hey, we're going to be competitive versus the things we need to do in order to get that outcome that we're searching for. That's what I'm really worried about.
But I think, Shaun, to go back to some of the good interviews that you have been doing, I think that the Grunwald piece that you get into, and if you've been, people have listened to it, they should go back, read some of the things that Grunwald's written over the years, but gets at this dynamic, right, where like multiple things can be true at the same time, right, where agriculture can be part of the climate problem, but better agriculture can, be part of the climate solution. We need to figure out how to have multiple of these things true in the Canadian context at the same time, where, yeah, it's important to be more competitive, but we also have other issues at the same time, and we need a clear sense as to actually what we want to do. One of the interesting things around productivity is we've been doing some work around it is, like, being more productive isn't kind of an end in and of itself, right? Being more productive is a means to achieving something else. It's always better to be more productive. But I think that we've obsessed about, we need to be more productive. We need to be more productive. Not necessarily. If you are a high-end fashion retailer, you're not productive. What you are is really, really profitable. And maybe that's what we want in Canadian agriculture. I'm not sure if that's true, but we need to better understand what is the outcome that we want, and then kind of get our butt in gear so that we're moving in that direction.
Googling Canadian High-End Fashion Association.
I mean, as a Canadian beef farmer, here's my plug for Canadian beef could be the highest end beef in the world. Let's get rid of that Japanese Wagyu stuff that's, nobody wants. Let's go out and say our beef is the best beef. It's the most sustainable beef, all of these things. And let's go out and lean into that. And let's understand that maybe that comes at the expense of productivity, but helps improve our productivity or our profitability at the end of the day.
I'm hearing echoes here of the messaging of some institution we used to have called the Canadian Wheat Board. And how they position Canadian wheat.
The difference is I want Canadian farmers to make these decisions for themselves and not have a government institution tell them to do it.
Oh boy. We've got.
So we're clarifying, Tyler, that there was no talk of a single death selling of beef there. Okay.
Just high end fashion.
High-end fashion.
Best quality fashion.
We got to take a break. We're going to get to the discussion around Michael Grunwald's interview and his new book, We Are Eating the Earth, when we come back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147. Built on over 100 years of seed innovation and unwavering commitment to farmers, Pioneer 100 Series canola hybrids deliver a step change in yield performance and agronomic traits. This isn't just better canola, it's different canola. Pioneer 100 Series. Contact your local Pioneer sales representative or visit pioneer.com/100 series to learn more today.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
You know what I really noticed on TV last night? Kelvin, we have this void. It's like the only sport that is on TV right now is baseball. And it was a light schedule last night. I sat down in front of the TV. I'm like, there's nothing on. This time of the year could be hard.
Hang on. You're forcing me to take opposing sides here again on you, Shaun. There was an amazing Winnipeg Blue Bombers versus Edmonton Elks CFL game last night.
Oh, really?
Winnipeg up to 3-0, Edmonton 0-3. Apologies to our Edmonton fans.
Yeah,
that's too bad. Well, you know what? My wife went to school with the Edmonton Elks coach, Mark Killam.
Oh,
he went to LCI in Lethbridge. There you go.
No idea.
It's one of the great things about the CFL is you can have connections like that, and the talent of the American college system. All those players coming north too.
Yeah, one thing I did, I was watching the opening weekend, I think it was the Riders game, and I noticed, and maybe they've been doing this for a while, first time I've noticed, which I think is good branding for the CFL. So a lot of CFL fans don't know where these players came from or their background, right? They just know them like, hey, they're playing in Canada. They've started to show the colleges. And in a lot of the cases, it's like, hey, went to Clemson, went to South Carolina, like, big time Power 5 or Power 4 schools. I think it's good for the CFL to do that during the broadcast. I think it shows that these are quality players for sure, and they're just not, afterthoughts. Like, I think sometimes they deal with that branding. Okay, so I know we got to get to the show, but so the obscure connections, okay? So I'm at this Invigor Gold launch in Great Falls, Montana on Tuesday. I'm sitting down, and I apologize, I cannot remember the guy's name. He was from North Dakota with one of the radio networks. And we're sitting there, we're having lunch, and he says, you're from Canada. You must love hockey. Were you cheering for the Oilers? I said, well, definitely not cheering for the Oilers. He's like, it makes sense. Yeah. And he was originally from Pittsburgh, and he said, I had said, you like hockey? He's like, yeah, I love it. I'm like, oh, Penguins fan? No. Ottawa Senators. Lyndsey. Ottawa Senators. And I was like, oh, that's weird. And he went through this whole reason why it had to do with video games and when he was a kid. And I said, well, actually, a family friend, my son grew up with Ridley Gregg, who plays for the Senators. And he's like, you know Greggers? He's like, say hello. I'm a big fan there in Grand Forks. So, it's just weird, these obscure sort of connections that we make. Let's get to Eating the Earth by Michael Grunwald, contributing columnist or essay writer to the New York Times and author of the new book, Eating the Earth. Lyndsey, when Grunwald reached out to me, and I admitted this to him, I sort of did I don't know if I want to do this interview, but I'm really glad that we did. I thought that he was critical, but also at the same time, I thought he was pretty balanced and fair. And I was quite happy with the result.
So I think I am really glad you did this, and for several reasons. I think that because he's, from outside of agriculture and admitted he didn't know really what he thought he knew or whatever, and decided to do this deep dive, I do think he can come from a place of being fair but critical. And brutally honest. And we don't have to agree, and I'm using the royal we don't have to agree with his take on everything, but I think he does come at it from a pretty balanced, as Tyler says, multiple things can be true at the same time. And I'm really hopeful, and I know so many people have listened to it. We've got some really great feedback on the fact that, maybe they don't like what he has to say, but he's probably right. They might flat out disagree with some of the things. That's okay too. But I really appreciate sort of that poking of the bear a little bit, but also challenging some of the things that we either believe or keep as gospel or whatever the case may be. I think it's really important that if you're going to push, if you're going to get better, if you're going to adopt new things or change anything, you probably need a bit of prodding every once in a while on why you think the way you do or why you believe in what you believe. And so I really appreciate sort of that conversation. I think one of the things that I come away with it is that if I had a criticism, and there are a few things I'm probably maybe a little different in opinion on, one of the things though that I think maybe, and I haven't read all the stuff he's done, so take that for what it's worth, but one of the things I think that the public in general, sometimes what I want to drive home though is we all have to eat. So as much as I recognize that agriculture is not perfect and that, yes, at times, he says it makes a mess, an environmental mess, et cetera, and I'm not saying that's okay. At the same time, there seems to be, this lens put on agriculture like somehow all of this is a choice, that we could just stop doing it all. No, we can't. We do. And so he does eventually, I think, make that point of we do have to produce food and in fact have to keep producing more calories and that eventually, we all have to come to terms with what that looks like and how we do it. And we do need to be open to technology and advancements and productivity gains because we do all have to eat. So I really enjoyed it. I am glad you said yes, Shaun, and that you did it.
Well, email here from Dave who says, good interview. While part of it was mirroring what I've been thinking for a year or so, but he's right in saying the book won't be popular in some ag camps. We need to get out of the our silo and echo chamber and start talking across the aisle. But we need less of us versus them dialogue. Even dairy, us versus ranch, them versus row crop or specialty crop can stir up some heated debates where passions and convictions run high. Kelvin, I don't agree that most farms are environmental crime scene, but I do agree with his idea that honestly, there's a give and take here, and there's a balance side to this, and we need to figure out how we can, with an environmental smartness, still be able to raise productivity. Yeah, totally. I completely agree with what Lyndsey said and what our commenter said there as well in terms of this. I think most of us in agriculture can agree at a high level too that it is about productivity and getting more food and what society's looking for out of the same amount or less resources going into it, becoming more efficient. I think that's something we can all agree on. It's the detail of how we do that and what's the best approach to do it and how to measure it. That's where we get into disagreement. But yeah, certainly it's always refreshing when somebody who comes at it from a mainstream angle, who comes at it from a non-agriculture angle, kind of grasps that and realizes that, hang on, we're all part of agriculture. We all eat, we all depend on it. And like Lyndsey said, and it's something that's always bugged me too, when we talk about emissions and percentage of countries' emissions coming from agriculture or net emission, aggregated emissions from agriculture, everybody is part of that. It's not just farmers. Everybody who eats depends on those emissions. And so if we want to sustain humanity and continue to grow humanity, we need agriculture, and we need that to be as efficient as possible, like Grunwald says. So yeah, it was refreshing to hear his perspective and look forward to actually diving into the book. Yeah. So Tyler, was there anything in particular that he said that you really disagree with?
This is probably like an inflammatory thing, but not very much. Really? And so I first came across him listening to a podcast that he did with a Washington Post columnist, Tamara Haspel, called what was it called? Climavores. They changed the name of it to something else. The two of them don't do it anymore. But it is this reality that we have a really complicated relationship, and even Shaun, that comment about farms being these environmental crime scenes. Like, you have to understand the context that he's making that statement. If you go back to how that farmland was before it was farmland, and the changes from then till now, there has been a huge, huge environmental impact. And I think often we think about how things are today and how things can be better tomorrow. But his point is, well, you also need to consider about how things were before and kind of the damage that's been done between then and now, and then we think about where things are in the future. And I struggle a bit with, again, people in agriculture like to talk about, we need to tell our story. But the story is complicated, and I think Michael really leads into that. One of the things that, again, we often talk about how our emissions intensity in agriculture is going down. We are producing quite a bit more food with fewer emissions, but our emissions are still going up. And in my mind, that is not inherently a bad thing, because we all need to eat. And the challenge and our inability to talk about those things without getting very defensive and very up in arms and very aggressive is a huge issue. And I think that that's probably the thing I like the most about Grunwald and his interview with you, the book that he's done, the other work that he does, is they talk about these things without making it an existential, we need to shut beef farming down because beef cows are worse for the environment, or we need to get rid of this or that or the next thing. And they talk about it in a relatively matter-of-fact way, and I think creates the condition for discussion. One of the things that he wrote late last year was an essay for the New York Times, where he talks about kind of the future of agriculture and farming is effectively factory farms. And the New York Times a couple of days later then ran a bunch of their responses to the piece because people were up in arms about it. But again, I think his point is very accurate, and it reflects the pragmatic reality of the food system. The future of agriculture is bigger, more efficient, more effective farms like this, and I think he puts that in a pretty matter of fact way. So I like that. I think that we need to be able to have more of these tough conversations in a way that's less difficult, because that's where we're going to get to better outcomes.
Yeah. Well, everybody, keep on sending your feedback, please. It was Tuesday's show, and we also posted the interview also separately on RealAgriculture.com. So please check it out, have a listen, and let us know what your thoughts are. Ag Expert, deep in the fields and deep in the data to back up your decisions on the farm. Get started at agexpert.ca. We'll be back with more of Real Ag Radio, Rural Radio 147, right after this quick break.
I'm Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomist, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
How's your seed quality? What should you treat with? What about herbicide carryover and environmental concerns? Spring is here, and you've got a lot of things to think about in regards to your pulse crop. The Pulse School on Real Agriculture has information and advice for all these questions and more to help you navigate this season. Brought to you by BASF. Pulse School episodes are available at pulseschool.com, realagriculture.com, or as a podcast on your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, the commercial break. You know what? I got to say, Tyler McCann gets me fired up sometimes during the break. What?
Sorry. I was just going to say, Shaun, in my defense, all I was doing was standing up for the rights of individuals to make the decisions that are in their best interest. And,
what was happening.
You have a different view, and I know you and some of the others out there that had a bad week in the Western Separatist movement. It was good to see Albertans not voting for the separatists that were running there. Good to see Tara Sawyer, a good farm leader elected.
Very good.
In Alberta, good to see that. Again, you and I see the world differently, Shaun.
There is a little bit more nuance that I think you got to stop just reading all your national newspaper stuff. There is some concerning. I'm not getting on that topic anyway. I would not take that vote based on the province's view on what should happen with Alberta independence. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And congratulations to, now would be former Alberta Grains Chair Tara Sawyer. Congratulations on your
and Grain Growers of Canada. She was
Good on Tara.
Congratulations.
We need more farmers to get into politics. It's always a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Who would be the top person that comes to mind in terms of former farmer that became a politician? Who comes to mind?
Jerry Ritz. I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you mean? In what context? Like the person that's done the best.
Well, you just said, hey, we need more farmers in politics. So I was just who comes to mind that's filled, should be examples. Great, good.
So Travis Taves in Alberta, good recent example. Finance minister. You had Jerry Ritz, the federal agriculture minister. I think that we've seen a couple of premiers. I mean, again, it depends on how far back you want to go, but we have had a pretty good track record of farmers getting into politics. I think actually probably farmers are overrepresented in politics compared to their kind of position in the population.
Yeah, but, especially compared to like coal miners. Kelvin. I don't know why that came to mind. Kelvin, WTO panels on between Canada and China. Both have been granted panels. Is WTO likely the route for solution here in both regards, or is this just a step in the process?
I think it's a step in the process, largely symbolic. Yes, the dispute settlement body on Monday, I believe it was, earlier this week, agreed to establish both these panels after both countries said that they didn't want to resolve it, but without going to that step. So, yeah, there's going to be one panel established to review China's complaint about Canada's tariffs on steel, aluminum, and electric vehicles, and then another panel that will review and investigate Canada's complaint about the Chinese tariffs on our agricultural exports on canola, peas, pork, seafood. And so, at the same meeting, though, there was another attempt by, I think it was led by Colombia this time, to start selecting members for the appellate body. And for the 88th time, it was blocked as the U.S. continues to say, no, we need major reform here to the appellate body. And so that final step that really gives the WTO the stick when it comes to resolving these disputes is still completely dysfunctional, and so the system remains broken.
Yeah. The Eric Lindros, 88th time.
Yeah, it seems like I'm not sure. At some point, you got to figure out a way. And I know they are working on it. So I think that was largely symbolic again too. But there is a lot of work going into trying to resolve that. I'm not sure that they're getting anywhere close to a resolution, though. Tyler might have more insight on that.
Well, I think the short answer is no. I mean, there's the U.S. stumbling block is quite a significant stumbling block. This is a reminder that one of the problems that the Chinese government has legitimately raised is that when Canada moved forward with its tariffs in response to China a year ago. It did not follow the appropriate rules that you're supposed to when you're doing these things. And I know that that's been a source of contention and also a good reminder of how important dispute settlement really is. And I know, again, this rules-based trading system is not as fashionable as it used to be, and everybody's quite happy, it seems, to live in the Wild West. But
understatement.
Boy, it is good to see countries like Canada and China and Colombia and others still committed to the WTO and still committed to a system that has served us well.
But what are you committed
more
to?
that we could do?
Like that, you committed to a concept that maybe functioned in prior. Like you're committed to a non-functioning body where there's no appellant judge. Like what
you're committed to the idea that we should have a rules-based trading system, and I think, Shaun, we live in a world.
So hold on, pump the brakes. China is committed to a rules-based trading system.
Again, I think that there is a strong argument to be made that there are challenges all around the world. China is clearly not. I think that there's a big debate around, and I think a legitimate debate where the U.S. may be accurate in saying it was a mistake to let China into the WTO. Again, I'll point out that it was Canada that did not live up to its WTO commitments when it put in place the EV tariffs a year ago. So, lots of challenges to go all around. My point is, this is like that idea, that concept that you talked about, Shaun, is a critically important one. And we need to continually remind ourselves of how important it is and to put the effort into trying to do what we can to salvage what's left of the rules-based trading system.
Lyndsey, it will not shock me if a part of the deal between Carney and Trump is Canada gets some relief in terms of some of the aluminum tariffs, for example, by putting more tariffs on Chinese steel and aluminum.
Potentially. I think that this is, it's complicated, but it is another, or just the continuation of Canada being stuck between these two countries, these two world powers, trying to keep everybody happy, trying to look out for your own interests as a country. But realistically, does anybody else feel like we're just sort of a pawn here and kind of end up just getting shuffled one way and then the other? Because that's certainly what it feels like to me.
Yeah. Maren Morris had a song about being in the middle. That's kind of Canada's theme song.
She's great.
Okay. Today, we're lucky because it's Friday, which means we typically do a bonus segment, which we are going to do. We're going to talk about a column that Anthony Parker, who works at CFIA, wrote. And I know Tyler has some strong takes on that. And also, I think it factors into what we heard on Wednesday's show, which was this release of Invigor Gold hybrid Brassica Gencia in the U.S., not in Canada. And we'll talk about that in the bonus here today. Hey, Kelvin, have a great weekend.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Hey, Lyndsey, all the best.
You as well.
And Tyler, we'll talk to you later.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Shaun.
If you have any feedback, everybody, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or, of course, you can always call that Real Ag feedback line. Keep the feedback coming. Love it. 855-776-6147. And thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Radio. This bonus segment I was just going to say, remember on Sesame Street? It was like, today's show was brought to you by La Lettre B. B for bonus.
B for bonus. And the number 5. No, 6. Okay.
Yeah, and the number 6. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, number 6.
Okay, so what did we not get to today? Kelvin, what came to mind?
One story that just came in today is that Saskatchewan, the provincial and federal governments have announced measures to support producers who are looking at low-yielding crops due to the drought. And so they've doubled the low-yield appraisal for crop insurance, makes it easier to divert crop into feed instead of taking it to harvest. So an announcement today coming from Heath McDonald and Daryl Harrison, the federal and provincial ag ministers.
Good news. Lyndsey, what comes to mind for you?
Mine's far less serious. We missed wishing Tyler McCann a very happy birthday this week. It was a big one.
Oh, he's right. 65. Yes. He's not middle-aged.
65. Yeah.
Thank you, Lyndsey and everyone. And I turned 40 this week. It's my midlife crisis, everyone. And I don't know. I joked that we're going to sell the cows and move to Bahamas. And so stay tuned.
Yeah, okay.
I'm wondering if you traded the minivan for like a Maserati or something.
Yeah, no. I was going to say sports car or muscle car. Tyler, what are you? Would you buy a sports car or a muscle car?
Oh, I'd buy a muscle car, but Actually, you know what? So we looked at buying an Expedition instead of our van. That's probably what I would buy if money wasn't an issue. But we're minivan people.
Yeah, I am for a little while yet.
Many have to sell many cows to even cows being worth what they are.
Yeah, I was going to say fewer cows
to buy
fewer cows than you might think. Anyway, yeah.
It reminded me how old my kids are because we haven't had a minivan forever. We had a Montana. Remember those? They were, I think, it was
the Montana.
Chevrolet Montana or a GM Montana.
Yeah. Do you guys remember that?
Never mind how old your kids are, Shaun. That means you're really old too.
He's
not as old as Lyndsey,
though, Tyler. That's right. Well, I am older. I am.
Well, I was trying not to bring that up, Lyndsey, but.
Well, I'm also the person that's had a terrible back. I've had like a terrible back for the past 5 weeks. So like I feel old. Who gets hurt swinging a golf club? This guy does significantly.
That guy. Yeah. Okay. Anyway.
Foam roller is a friend.
Yeah, we do have actually like beyond how old Shaun is that we do have some significant things to cover. And I know you mentioned before we headed to this break the Anthony Parker piece, but I did want to send a shout out to Tyler, not just for his birthday, but we did also post the webinar from last week that Cappy and Real Agriculture did about digital agriculture and pushing Canada forward. And that's on our YouTube channel and RealAgriculture.com. And it is fantastic. Shout out, Glenn Friesen is on there. And I haven't seen or heard from Glenn in a long time. And it was great.
He's an old chum of yours, right?
He is. He was MC at my first wedding. Yeah, I was his summer student when he was doing his master's. We had a lot of fun.
Oh, really? I didn't know that connection. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And there's a bit of an interesting theme between Glenn and Anthony in that these are people that work in government departments out talking about interesting things, and that is more of a novelty than it should be.
and like interesting things, not from the aspect they're talking about the next Marvel movie. They're actually like talking about how we move the country forward.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Shaun, here's the thing that I think that we missed that is a inside Ottawa baseball thing, but the Globe and Mail ran a story this week saying that the Prime Minister is prepared to dismiss deputy ministers who aren't up to the job and aren't getting results. And that is an interesting change of pace in how government works. And I think, again, hopefully it's a good sign for those of us that think that it could work a lot better.
Are we seeing a legit culture change in some of our governments?
I think that the short answer is we are in that direction, right? We haven't actually seen a deputy. Actually, we haven't seen a deputy dismissed yet because of poor performance. There's been some retirements, and I think that culture change is coming. But I've had a couple of senior civil servants say to me recently that like people should be shaken in their boots. Like this is a serious issue, and that was said in the context of some regulatory agencies as well, where people in the bowels of departments or in the CFIA, for example, might still be carrying on business as usual, but things are changing at the top, and that will roll downhill, and that will impact how people do their work every day.
Well, yeah, part of it's probably a bit of a change in attitude from like, okay, instead of focusing on the why this won't work or why we can't, let's figure out like how we'd make it happen. Like,
to get away from that process to results.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about Anthony Parker. We're going to play him. That interview will be on next Wednesday's show. It is posted at RealAgriculture.com for all of you that go to the website. Please check it out. And I've known Anthony for quite a while. He's always had. I wasn't surprised on what he said because these are the things that this is kind of the way that he goes about himself. He is his official title is, what is he? Commissioner of Plant Breeders' Rights in Canada with CFIA. In the seed industry, held in high regard. And I don't know, Tyler, you know him well, like I do. He makes a lot of sense. And this is somebody coming from, like Lyndsey was actually, does this person work at CFIA? Like, it's not like some surprise. No, like for all the CFIA employees that are listening to this show, that's not a slight at you, but just, it's coming at it from a little bit of more of like a business or like entrepreneur sort of like, we got to make some changes and make this happen.
And I think part of it is reflects the position and the work that Anthony's done over the years. And I got to know Anthony whenever we made legislative changes at the tail end of the Harper government to modernize Canada's approach to plant breeders' rights. And I think one of the sources of frustration is we changed the legislation, but we haven't seen the same follow through that that's needed there. But his work in plant breeders' rights puts him in close contact with people that are out trying to breed new varieties and get them to market and put them into practice. And it's not just wheat, it's across cherries and potatoes and all sorts of other things that he's involved with. And I think he sees firsthand how hard that is in the Canadian context, and he sees around the world how other countries are doing a better job of it. And I think, again, he talks sense. And this is where that culture change that we just talked about a minute ago is going to hit out people in the bureaucracies differently. Some people are there and they're ready to go. Anthony is definitely not alone in thinking Canada can do better. But the reality is that there's a lot of other people that are really comfortable with the status quo. And unfortunately, some of Anthony's colleagues in the seed section may be a bit of an example of that, where they think about the framework that exists today. But you go back to that BASF announcement this week, like that should be another sign that we're falling behind, that Canada's not an easy place to do business, and we need to think differently about it.
It is not. I found that out during the work I did with those bioenterprise innovation roundtables. Not an easy place. And that's coming from an entrepreneur standpoint. There are people that, they believe very firmly, and they're entitled to their opinion. They believe very firmly that it's good for Canada to have this higher bar, that, we're protecting people from bad things, whatever that is, and it's a higher standard.
Except, Shaun, they're not entitled to their own facts, right? And I think if you look pretty consistently across a number of different things, right, the facts are that business R&D investment in Canada is falling, right? Like, this is going down. We are chasing people out of this country. We are not keeping pace around productivity growth. We've got these issues where it's declining. We are seeing governments back off again on the R&D and innovation space. Like on many, many metrics, this is not good. Never mind the fact that, again, we talked earlier about government cuts and spending and different priorities and all of the pressures that's going to put on the system. Like, we're not in a good space, and we need to be prepared to do things differently. And people can hang on to kind of how things were before, but look, at the world is different than it was when variety registration was created. Affected, some of that seed regulatory framework is 100 years old, over 100 years old.
Well, it was a little disheartening this week. I'll be honest. It hurt being at that Invigor Gold release in Great Falls, Montana. BASF US did a great job with the launch. It was great to do the show from there. That's Wednesday's show if you missed it. It was disheartening when you see, Northern Plains, the release of hybrid brassica gentiana 2027, Central Plains 2029, and Canada sometime in the early 2030s. There are details, yes, and we can, if this was a seed-only podcast, we could dig into some of that. Just at 100,000 feet, that's I think it's a good example of the difference between Canada and our largest neighbor to the south.
I mean, the one example of this that I always like to think about is Syngenta wound up its breeding program in Canada. Everybody just shrugged their shoulders and went, we don't care. And that's like
no. I had audience members emailing me saying this is a good thing.
How is that a good thing? How?
Because I don't want the price of seed to go up.
I mean, the good news is if you don't want to pay more for seed, you can, let's be honest, keep using the seed that's in the bin. But if you want new varieties and you want better performing varieties and you want disease resistance and you want an innovative trait package and you want to be able to adapt to changing climate and changing pest profiles, then somebody needs to invest in that R&D. And there's a role for private investment, there's a role for farmer investment, and there is a role for public investment. But for too long in Canada, we have expected public investment to play a much bigger role than is reasonable to expect. And that is going to change. And I think farmers can think that the way things were is the way things will always be. Kelvin brought up the wheat board earlier. We can think that that is just the way that it should be in the future. But at a certain point, reality arrives. And that's going to be tough. And we need to think a lot more smarter about it.
Lyndsey, jump in here. You're far too quiet.
Okay, so no, Kelvin is too quiet. He's just sitting there wrapping Tyler's birthday present. Anyway, no. So for our listeners, Shaun, because you mentioned, if this were a seed podcast, we could spend an hour on this. But one of the things that strikes me about this is that we often in Canada, we sit back and go, of course, a company doesn't want to bring a technology here, too small a market. Or, of course, we're not going to get a product registration. It's too expensive for the size of the market. So that's a more complicated thing. But these are the things we think about. For canola, we are not a small market. So unpack for us why you think, or from your perspective, like this is one of those times where the canola acreage is significant in Canada. So what is the thinking from a company's perspective of why a launch here would be so further down the line? Because to me, this isn't where that easy, like, hey, it's too small a market. It's not.
No, it has nothing to do with any of that. It has to do with the variety registration process in terms of, from a hybrid perspective. It also has to do with the deregulation of the Liberty Link trait. And there's a third item that is escaping me right now off the top of my head. But it has to do with regulatory issues. There also is some pushback domestically in Canada. Do we want, does it threaten, say, the exports of mustard, for example, if we had hybrid Brassica gensea in those same, when I say fringe acres, I mean like fringe traditional canola acres, right? The more drier, like think of like Swift Current, Saskatchewan. Some years it makes sense to grow canola, some years it doesn't, because you're really at the hands of and the hold of Mother Nature. So in the right or wrong, the attitude south of the border on this is like, yeah, let the market decide. We'll figure it out. And there's also more domestic consumption of some of these products, less focus on how does this impact the export market. To be fair, if you look at one of the reasons why we don't have avian influenza vaccines in the U.S. is because they're worried about the export market. So there is examples where they do care about exports. But I think, Canadian farmers should look at this and be like, wait a minute, why does the farmer in Shelby, Montana have access to this technology in 2027 and I, on the same type of soil, the same conditions, may not have access to it till the early 2030s, or if at all?
Even later. Yeah, if at all.
It does kind of remind me a little bit of the wheat board, where it's like, man, I'm looking across the fence. What the heck, Canada? I just sort of feel that needs to get more emphasis.
And so maybe, sorry, go ahead, Kelvin.
I was just going to quickly say, anytime you want to make big changes, though, there are winners and losers. And a lot of the reasons these changes aren't being made in Canada is because there are entrenched interests. And as Tyler alluded to in the bureaucracy, there's the status quo, and people are benefiting from keeping their jobs in the status quo, that type of thing. And so you have to have leadership at the top among the decision makers in terms of understanding the net benefit to everyone and selling people on that, explaining to people how this will benefit us as a whole, and then figuring out how to divvy up those benefits so that the people that are potentially worse off aren't way worse off, or to soften the impact on them because of the overall benefit to society or to the industry or to the sector. And I think that's where we need political leadership and decision makers to do that job.
Yeah. I'll tell you, one of the big awakenings for me, and not awakenings, but just maybe confirming my bias, was the discussion that we had with Montana Renewables. After their plant expansion, which is, I think, completed in 2028, they could use, if they chose canola as their main feedstock, they're talking 3 million acres of canola just for that plant. Now, they are the largest SAF plant, or the largest SAF producer in the United States, right there in Great Falls, home of the famous Sip and Dip. But that's significant. 3 million acres in just on that facility with SAF. Boy, I'll tell you what, that's going to drive demand and provides an opportunity for, canola going forward. And not to get too geeky out on seed side of the equation, there's not a lot of room for growth. We got 21.5 million acres of canola here in 25 in Western Canada, according to the Stats Can report. Today, there's not a lot of room for upside. So if we do see the uptake for SAF and for renewable diesel, the bio-based diesels, I don't know where we're going to produce all the seed, because there could be a significant acre increase, especially if you're able to produce something like a hybrid Brassica gensea in, say, the Central Plains, like in a Kansas or a Nebraska. they're begging for new crops and new opportunities. So anyway, Tyler, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that there's an interesting Canadian parallel. So we've got Imperial Oil bringing on a new facility in Strathcona, right? My understanding is that once it's up and going, it will take half, that one facility will take half of what we were exporting to China for canola seed. Like some of these, I think we often don't appreciate how much of a game changer some of these large facilities can be in the renewable fuel space. You do go back though to this is again one of the Grunwald arguments that this is probably not the best use of that land or those products, and so you get that tension around, why are we doing this? What is the role of this government policy? How does it play out in the biofuel space? But also going back to something that Grunwald says, canola is, if you're going to use something to make sustainable aviation fuel, I think there's a lot of good arguments around that it should be canola, and it should be better performing canola, and it should be there should be a lot of opportunity there. So how that kind of all plays out will be interesting to see. I think that there's like, again, go back to this thing that we've talked about before, just this cultural issue of we should want these things in Canada, and too often we don't.
Accepting of slowness, like that's, I don't know, that's a whole rant that's gonna. Kelvin, you're trying to say
we're out of time.
Were you gonna say something?
No, I just, there's people that benefit from the status quo, and you got to figure out a way to shake things up every now and then. I think we're due for that.
Yeah. I think we are, but change is hard.
And I think it also speaks to the risk adverseness that we have. Like, what are all the things that potentially could go wrong? And then that becomes a whole nother layer of barriers instead of the focus on, okay, like there's these barriers. How do we overcome them? And how do we make this happen? And so new crops can coexist into the current systems that we have. Like, it can be done. It's just, we get bogged down in this, okay, like what we think documents and what is the overall impact 5 times over. And it creates this whole layer of process that for whatever reason other jurisdictions don't have to go through. That is kind of the mind-boggling part. But
I tell you, Shaun, I heard somebody allude today to the government doing another round of consultations on the Grain Commission, and I thought,
oh my Lord,
oh heavens! I hope that that's
heavens.
just somebody kind of
case in point.
But like again, the government just needs to get on and do it some of these days.
So, like, to that point, like, I get consultation's important, great, cool, but like, we have things done. When we make change, there are some changes that are permanent. There is no reversing them. There is no whatever. When it comes to some policies, you can actually change it after you've implemented something. Like, you can make a change and then you can change your change. I don't know why we're so terrified
of to make a decision.
Actually update, right? Like, it is like, just update the damn thing, and then if it's not working out, update it again. It's not that hard, guys.
Called being agile. Go ahead, Tyler.
So let me give a shout out to Tom Nuds, who wrote a paper for us on active adaptive management in the conservation space.
Yes.
And I was talking to a journalist about this the other day, and part of the premise there is we need to accept that, like, science evolves and changes, and sometimes we learn new things and need to do things differently. But this, again, the idea is we should be out, especially in conservation space, try something, monitor its impacts, and if it works, keep doing it, and if it doesn't, you do something different. That is inherently like a wildly different mindset than how we think about these things, because government thinks that if it's going to do it, it's going to do it forever, and does all of this kind of, consultation and kind of ongoing process.
Yeah, I guess the point being is that from a stakeholder, which I hate the word, but whatever, from a stakeholder's perspective, if we have a government system that never adapts and never changes and never updates things, then you could certainly see where it's like, oh, we have to make sure any changes to legislation are perfect because we might be stuck with it for 50 years. So, like, it has to go on, it has to follow down the line, right? It has to be that there has to be a willingness to implement change and then exactly that, measure the impact and change again. So we have to have a more dynamic policy system to actually make this all happen. But yes, guess what? We can change and then we can change again.
When's the last time we had an agriculture relevant piece of legislation? Like, this is something we've talked about in the past, like something that actually changed agricultural legislation. I think this is part of our issue here in Canada, is that it's so difficult to get things through the political process that people don't dare start.
Except
that's over a decade.
That was almost 13 years ago.
Except I think that we also take the pressure off of those things that are within our control, right? So, you know what? There's a lot of parliament, government, it's got its own pressures. Let's look at the ag policy framework and that FPT meeting that ag ministers have. There are things they could do that are squarely within their responsibility to make things better. Again, we've been talking about that digital ag webinar. One of the arguments one of the things we talk about there is ag ministers should say this is actually a priority. Not kind of everything's a priority and we love everybody equally, but digital agriculture, development, adoption of digital ag technologies should be a real priority. They could do that. There's nobody else standing in the way of those things. And we don't even do the thing. We can't even get our leaders to do the things that are well within their control. And that's part of the problem we got.
Right. But on that, so there is things that have happened. So AFC was a participant and a funder and organizer of those roundtables that I facilitated. And you look at FCC and their capital commitment of $2 billion. Those aren't legislative changes, but those are showing, hey, we need to do some things differently in this area.
Yeah, but I don't think it's necessarily a great thing for the country, to be honest, when we have to rely on FCC to be the leader on these things. I think there's actually, I want to get into kind of wonky public policy stuff, Shaun. There's an argument to be made that FCC shouldn't be doing that because they are effectively acting as a department without the oversight that a department has. The government should be showing the leadership. Or again, I guess the fortunate thing is that Justine Hendricks, as the CEO, wants to have an impact and wants to do things differently. But
they keep
really
that word catalyst.
Shouldn't be up to them. It should be up to our agriculture minister, the federal and provincial ones across the country to be doing these things.
You know, Lyndsey, when you were talking about, when you were just providing your prior perspective there, I thought of the saying, don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
That's right. What is it? It's like you can absolutely overanalyze or put fear in the way. Like we know this from, especially our last government, the Trudeau government. If you're going to consult on things, nothing will ever move forward because there's always another study or there's always and I am not saying we go all willy-nilly, but when you've got a decent idea, an informed path forward, give it a go and then tweak and improve and whatever. That is okay. It is okay. And as you said, I think on the Cappy webinar of the fail fast, fail better, right? Yeah. Like fail forward. All these things it's really important. It's okay to adopt something, to change a policy. You can change it back. You can change it to something else. Like, how are we going to know if we never do anything? You won't know.
But think of all the risks think about all the risks we mitigated by doing nothing.
No, because doing nothing is a choice and doing nothing is a risk.
That is sarcasm on my part. I just want to make it very clear.
I know it is. And you are poking the bear.
And I think it's good that Lyndsey's going to take on all of the losers that Kelvin talked about earlier, right? Because that ultimately is the issue, is that
there will be
on
losers.
All of these things, there are going to be losers because go back to the digital ag piece, right? If digital agriculture becomes a priority, that means something that money was being spent on before is not going to get its money anymore. And whoever was getting that money, they're going to be upset. And that is a good example of the trade-offs that we face, is that, you have to do things differently, and there's going to be consequences.
But also, without consequences or without that, where do we get the fire in our belly to be like, okay, so that's maybe a direction I should go, or I should change something, or I could make use of that. Like I get that, and I'm a sheep farmer, guys. It's not easy. Okay. So I'm coming at this from the perspective of like, it's sort of like this conversation of like, the grain price isn't high enough. No, the grain price is what it is. You have to adapt to be profitable within that system. Right? And that's Brian Voth that says that, right? The market doesn't care what price you need. The market is the market, and you've got to adapt to it. It's the same thing with policy. It's the same thing with where we're going with things, is that we have to have a signal to us as producers of this is the path we're going down. And maybe that is a different path than yours. But so then you look at, how do I hop on that path? And that's how change happens, is there has to be some sort of leadership of this is where we want to go. what within your operation can get you on that path as well, because that's where we're headed.
So I agree, like 100%. But there also is like this makeup of people wanting the government to like show the way, and like that they are somehow going to save us from ourselves, instead of it being like set up the context, the environment, and entities, people and companies forging through that with all the entrepreneur instinct and flair and drive to have success. And this is the part that concerns me about all of this, going back to the very beginning of the panel in terms of like, falling into our old sort of behaviors. It's the cultural side of this that I had a discussion with a friend earlier this week. We had coffee, and he does a lot of work in the mainstream, consulting businesses and entrepreneurs across Canada and the US. Really concerned about entrepreneurship in Canada. And so many entrepreneurs just trying to take guidance from the government. What programs can I access? Or, geez, just the excuse is like, just we need to work on entrepreneurship in the country. And I don't know how we do that, because that is like way more systemic.
But if we're seeing culture change in government, I think that is a start to do that, because that has been, we saw through the pandemic timeframe how politically popular it was for the government to stand up and say, we have your back. We're going to make sure that even if you are laid off or you can't go to work, you're going to get these CERB payments or the different programs that were announced. That was very politically popular. Canadians wanted that, and politicians noticed that, and the Trudeau government certainly leaned into that, and that's why we saw the escalation in the deficit and the massive inflation that everybody complained about later on, even if they didn't correlate it to the government spending, the bailout that happened. But yeah, if the government culture is changing, maybe then, I don't know, it's a chicken and egg problem where Canadians expect this, so government provides it. But if government changes, maybe Canadians will learn, maybe we shouldn't expect all this from the government.
And I think I spend a lot of time thinking or looking at what they do in the Australian context. I think too often we fall in the trap of comparing ourselves to the States. We should do more to compare ourselves to how Australia is. And again, I think my takeaway is that their culture is different. That when you look at what their government is trying to do, it's far more about how do we facilitate and enable others to do other things, rather than in the Canadian context, doing it ourselves. But that is largely because 25 or 30 years ago, they effectively woke up, realized the government was bankrupt, and they needed to radically change how they did business. And so I think that, again, you need that kind of crisis moment to drive change throughout it. Arguably, what we're seeing with the United States today is our crisis moment. Arguably, what the federal government is starting to do now is that, to Kelvin's point, that first start of that change. And so some of this we may only notice 10 years from now, whether or not that culture change has happened. But again, I think some of these efforts that we're going to see are hopefully steps in the right direction of moving towards that. And I think that is a bit of a theme through the show today, is like, again, we need to kind of start to see these steps forward to do things differently.
Great perspectives today, everybody. Really do appreciate it. Great work. And audience, we'd love to hear your feedback. What are your thoughts on all of this? I know I always ask for feedback, but I do mean it very sincerely. It is great to hear your perspectives on these things. They're just as important as any panelist that comes on here or anything that any of our team has to say, and would love your thoughts. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Always more than welcome to also call the Real Ag feedback line. That number is 855-776-6147, where you leave me a voicemail. Okay, thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Radio. Have yourselves a great weekend, and we'll chat with you again next week.